and the fun begins. Joining me here in the studio is Liberal MP Alan Tudge and Labor MP Stephen Jones. Thank you both for your time today and welcome back.
Good to be with you.
Let's start with the Speaker now, Alan Tudge. It looks like Parliament isn't going to be gentle. Is Bronwyn Bishop the right person to keep it under control? She was kicked out a number of times.
I think Bronwyn Bishop will be an outstanding Speaker. She is a very experienced person. She's a formidable individual. She knows the standing orders backwards, and I think she will be an excellent Speaker and very impartial across the Parliament.
Graham Perrott going after, well, she wasn't quite the Speaker at that point, but going after her like that, fairly unconventional. Is that something we can expect to see more of, that kind of aggression in this 44th Parliament?
Well, I think Ms Bishop, and can I start by saying congratulations on her elevation to the role, an important role in our Parliament. In the 43rd Parliament, she was one of the government's attack dogs. And as she herself got up and said on her elevation, this is a tough adversarial Parliament, and I don't think she would have expected any less. The Leader of the Opposition and the Deputy Opposition called upon her to act in a non-partisan way, to ignore the plaintive pleas of the Prime Minister and Christopher Pyne as Leader of the House, who in fact implored her to act in a partisan way. She said she wouldn't. I hope she keeps good to that.
OK, well, we know that the repeal of the carbon tax is the government's first order of business. We've been over that a million times. So I want to actually go to the second order of business, which is the raising of the debt ceiling.
Sure.
The Coalition wants to raise it by $200 million to $200 billion, I should say, to $500 billion. Labor's only going to allow a $100 million increase. Stephen Jones, first to you. Labor raised the debt ceiling several times and also left the Coalition with this rising debt. And also, Wayne Swan last year actually tabled a minute that showed on Labor's own numbers, $400 billion wouldn't quite be enough. So why not allow it?
Well, two things. Firstly, half of the government's problems are of their own making by denying themselves certain revenue streams and by handing out multi-billion-dollar grants to the Reserve Bank, which have exacerbated their circumstances. We don't think it's unreasonable to hold the government to the same standard that they held us to. That is, if you want us to vote for an increase in your debt ceiling, explain the reasons why.
If it gets close to the debt ceiling, will Labor threaten the government with a fiscal cliff a la the Tea Party in the United States?
There is absolutely no risk of a fiscal cliff. You know, Joe Hockey, I don't know if he's briefed you on this, but he's been briefing a lot of the other journalists around this place saying, well, we'll probably hit 410, and that's really the number we need. Well, if Joe Hockey is certain about the number he needs, bring it to Parliament. Be open and transparent about it. Australians deserve to know what the true state of affairs is. After all, this is the same standard that he held for us, and they were the ones who voted against the increase in the debt ceiling. We have put a compromise position to them saying that we will approve an increase up to $400 million, but they are going to have to justify any increase above that.
Alan Tudge, Joe Hockey has gone from before the election promising to pay off the debt to after the election seeking to allow it to be raised by 67%.
Well,
how do you justify that?
We inherited a financial mess from the Labor Party. No two bones about that. We are going to breach the $300 billion cap in a matter of weeks, so there is urgency to this, to increasing the debt limit. We expect it to rise above $400 billion, but what we are proposing is a $500 billion limit, in part to give us some flexibility for unforeseen circumstances. And that's on the back of advice from the Office of Financial Management, and so we are heeding their advice and we're hoping that we'll have the support of the other parties.
And at some point, obviously, you're going to, or you say you're going to start paying it down.
That's right.
Some of the biggest expenses, though, that you've committed to, the NDIS and Better Schools, which overnight the Prime Minister's own business advisor said signing up to was reckless. Can you commit here to keeping them in place exactly as they are now?
So we made a number of election commitments. Some of those election commitments were for savings and quite considerable savings, some of which will be difficult. Others were for commitments towards certain programs. We will deliver upon our election commitments, and we will also ensure that the budget gets back into surplus in a reasonable time frame, and so that we can start paying back that debt.
So does that mean that there will be no change ever to better schools and to the NDIS in particular?
We're working through the NDIS, as you know. The Productivity Commission did a review, and we're keen to abide by the Productivity Commission's timetable, and we want to do that on a bipartisan basis. There's trials in place at the moment. We've got a new government, a new minister in charge, and we're working through what is a very important but very complex matter, and we want to do it in a staged, considered, appropriate manner so that we can deliver upon expectations.
So expensive policies, expensive reforms, but ones that are worth it, you still believe?
They are worth it. We do have to make savings elsewhere, and we have documented many savings. Some of those savings, as I said, will be tough. But we are determined to deliver upon those election commitments, including the NDIS, which is a very important reform. At the same time, we need to make savings so that we can get the budget back into the black and start paying off Labor's enormous debt.
Stephen Jones, the policies that Labor took into the election didn't really have a way to fund the NDIS and better schools beyond the estimates. That's when the price really goes up. I mean, can we afford these policies in their current form?
I'll get to that in a moment. Can I first make the point that the budget and the set of public finances that Tony Abbott inherited come with a AAA credit rating by all the major ratings agencies. To say that there is problems with the finances, or to use the inflated language that Alan uses, is absolute rubbish. They inherited a good set of finances. They're making problems worse for themselves by giving tax cuts.
Deterioration in debt.
I heard you in silence, Alan. You'll hear me in silence. You made your problems worse by giving tax cuts to miners and to high superannuation earners, making life harder for low superannuation, low-income earners on superannuation. But in terms of the finances, we made savings to introduce the NDIS and the Gonski school reforms, and we introduced an increase in the Medicare levy, which in standard budget accounting processes ensured that it was fully funded over the forward estimates periods. We're quite honest about the fact that if after the trial period there needed to be more savings or more revenue initiatives to put in place, then we'd look at that point in time.
Okay, let's turn to foreign investment. Joe Hockey today has approved the foreign investment application from Saputo Incorporated to bid for Warrnambool Cheese and Butter Factory Company. Now, no conditions, and he said clearly in his statement, once again, Australia is open for business. Is that a sign of where he may go or should go in the GrainCorp decision, do you think, Alan?
I think each individual decision needs to be taken on its merits, and we've consistently said that. We have a Foreign Investment Review Board to ensure that foreign investment is in Australia's national interests, and that determination was made here for the Warrnambool Cheese and Butter Company. Bear in mind, with this company, the decision was only made to allow Saputo, the Canadian company, to bid on it. There are two other Australian bidders also for that company, and it's ultimately up to the shareholders now to determine who they'll sell the company to.
Yeah, because Tony Abbott said, I think all of us emotionally hope that the favoured bidder is either Bega Cheese or Murray Goulburn. Some people took that as a sign that Joe Hockey might be edging towards not allowing it.
Sure, and it's ultimately now up to the shareholders. They have to make the call as to who they're going to sell it to, and they have to make the call as to what will be in their shareholders' best interests.
Stephen Jones, do you have any issues with the approval?
Oh, look, I think there's mixed messages coming out of the government on this one at the moment. On the one hand, you've got Joe Hockey and Tony Abbott saying we're open for business, and on the other hand you've got the Nationals saying not unless we check your passport. Now frankly, I think we need more certainty when it comes to foreign investment decisions. Australia has relied on foreign capital to ensure that we have industry and business financed for all but 1 year since Federation. Nothing should change on that. We need more certainty around this, and it takes a little bit more than Tony Abbott appealing to his emotions. Ultimately, as Alan says, shareholders are going to be the ones who make a decision on this.
Alan Tudge, what do you say to your Nationals colleagues who've raised concerns, particularly about the GrainCorp sale?
In relation to the GrainCorp, it will operate like every other major decision where the Foreign Investment Review Board will assess it and make a determination as to whether or not it is in Australia's national interest.
In that case, what about the Warrnambool Cheese and Butter Company? What do you say? That decision's been made. What do you say to your Nationals?
And that is exactly the same in relation to that decision. So that's been through that process. The Treasurer has ticked off on it, and now it is up to the shareholders as to whether or not they will sell it to one of the two Australian companies bidding for it or to the Canadian company which is bidding for it. It's a case-by-case example to determine whether or not it's in Australia's national interest. We need foreign investment, as Stephen said, but it has to be in Australia's national interest, and that's precisely why we have this process in place.
There's no national interest concerned over, one of Australia's, what will be one of Australia's largest dairy companies. Why is there going to be a national interest enlivened over GrainCorp? And surely the message to the National Party at the moment is, quite at odds with all of their public statements. You can have emotional appeals all you like, but it'll be the foreign investors that get the tick every time.
Another big issue this 44th Parliament is, as it was in the 43rd Parliament, asylum seekers. And I want to turn to that issue now. Indonesia, Alan Tudge, says that there are plans afoot for a people swap arrangement with Indonesia. Would you support that?
Australia is not engaged in people swaps. We're having ongoing discussions with the Indonesians. We are doing so on a regular basis. Our firm
so Indonesia's wrong on that?
When we are not engaging in people swaps. So our firm resolve is to stop the flow of boats, David, as every person in Australia no doubt knows, and we're determined to ensure that happens.
Can you just define people swap for me? Because I just want to make sure we're not using tricky words here. Because
no, you won't, and you should speak to the immigration minister in relation to this. But we are not engaging in people swaps. Okay. So we are having ongoing discussions with the Indonesians on a very regular basis, and we're using every method that we can in order to stop the boats at the moment, and we are succeeding in that. There is a 75% reduction in the number of boats today than there was pre the election when Labor was in power.
Stephen Jones, on the people swap, we'll keep using those words, but obviously Labor had an arrangement with Malaysia before it was shot down by the High Court. Would you have any issues with a similar arrangement with Indonesia?
Let's be clear about this. The Malaysian arrangement was shot down by the opposition. So for them to then go and put in place a similar arrangement with Indonesia would be the height of hypocrisy.
Well, initially it was shot down by the High Court.
It was what the High Court said was the existing legislation does not support this agreement. You have to go back to Parliament. We took it back to Parliament, and the coalition sided with the Greens and shot it down with crocodile tears from Joe Hockey. Apparently it was cruel to put people on a 747 and send them back to Malaysia, but not to push their boat back towards Jakarta.
So what about this Indonesia arrangement? If it is going on, if there are discussions, would it be something that you would support?
Look, the government would have to meet the same sorts of tests that we set for ourselves when we were in government. We know that we need regional cooperation. And they've had a pretty lousy first 2 months when it comes to cooperation from our regional neighbours. Frankly, I'll be very surprised if they'll be able to get the same sort of cooperation with Indonesia that we were able to get with Malaysia.
Alan Tudge, what do you say to Labor's claims that the turnaround policy is in tatters after demonstrations that, well, Indonesia hasn't accepted two requests for a return of asylum seekers to that country?
Well, there's also been turnaround boats which have succeeded, but the key measure of our success, David, is whether the boats have slowed and indeed will stop. And on that single measure, we are succeeding to date. We started to make a difference from day one, and already now there is a 75% reduction in the flow of boats.
Because of
this is again a mess which we inherited from the Labor government.
What have you done that's different?
We said that we were determined to fix up, and we are making a difference already, David.
I'll get you to answer Stephen Jones's question there. What have you done differently?
Well, already we've made a number of decisions. We've turned back some boats already. We've started discussions with Indonesia immediately and got some cooperation
you haven't quite turned back boats.
From Indonesia.
Just to clarify,
we've instituted operations.
You haven't actually turned boats around. You have rescued asylum seekers and returned them
back to Indonesia.
Which
is something which the Labor government said was absolutely impossible.
It wasn't turning back boats.
And what's more, we've just had an absolute resolve right from the get-go that we we will stop the people smugglers business. And that is actually, in some respects, the most important thing. This firm resolve that we will do what it takes in order to stop the flow of boats and stop the people smugglers business.
Stephen Jones,
and wind.
The reality is, though, the reality is that the numbers.
I'm looking at the numbers.
Look at the numbers. There is a major difference that has been made.
75% reduction in the flow of boats in
Because
the
of PNG.
2 months since the
Because of PNG.
instigation
You
of
cannot
Operation Sovereign Borders compared to the 2 months
Alan,
previously.
you cannot point to one concrete thing that you have done which has changed the way we are dealing with this issue. The reason that there has been a change in the flow of boats, A, monsoon season, B, PNG. That's what's making the difference. You know that. That's what the departmental officials are telling you. And by the way, they're also telling you if you want a long-term... I'll listen to you in silence. If you want a long-term enduring solution, you might try and go Indonesia and try and get the same sort of arrangement that we, as the former government, were able to put in place with Malaysia, but you'll probably never give it in place with them because of what you said in Parliament about the Malaysians and the conditions there. You're getting the same advice as we got. You'll act on it if you're responsible in the same way that we did. You are doing nothing different. You are inheriting the benefits of the PNG arrangements.
Well,
have the good grace to admit it.
A quick response and we'll move on.
There was 50,000 people who arrived under Labor's watch. When Labor exited government, 3 boats a day were arriving. Now we haven't had we haven't had a boat for the last almost 3 weeks without a boat. A 75% reduction already. We still have a long way to go, but they're the numbers which we need to be looking at.
All right, you can see on your screen the Prime Minister's courtyard, those famous doors out the front, or the back, you could say, of the Prime Minister's office, and Tony Abbott will be stepping through those doors any moment now. In the meantime, we'll continue with our discussion. I want to look at the renewable energy target. Currently, Australia's target is to increase renewable energy, the usage of it, to 20% by 2020. Now, the government is using language which links the RET to higher electricity costs. Is that an indication that it may be amended or dumped entirely in order to save people money? Alan Tudge.
We have always said, and we made this commitment pre-election, that we would review the mandatory renewable energy target, and that will occur next year. It will be an open review, it will be a consultative review, and of course one of the things which we will look at is its impact on electricity prices. But we're not going to preempt that review.
So, what do you mean? I mean, can you rule out reducing that target?
We're not preempting the review. We said 2 things towards the election. One was a commitment towards a mandatory renewable energy target, and the second was that we would review it if we were elected to government. So we will undertake that review starting next year. We will deliver on that election commitment. Of course we are concerned about electricity prices. That's why the very first bill that we are introducing into this parliament is to abolish the carbon tax, because that will help families by an average of $550 per annum by the abolition of that.
In a minute. I just want to stick with the renewable energy target for now. How do you sell it, Stephen Jones, to families that are struggling with high electricity bills, after acknowledging in the lead up to the election that the carbon tax was hurting people and that people are struggling with their power bills and gas?
I favour a market-based mechanism, the same one that Alan used to favour before he became a member of Tony Abbott's opposition. He wrote some very good articles on the importance of a market-based mechanism for reducing carbon emissions when he was an environmental and economic consultant. But the thing about the RET, and let's be quite clear about this, it is driving investment in renewable energy. The first thing that Tony Abbott is doing on becoming Prime Minister of this country is injecting uncertainty in the renewable energy sector. That is people who want to invest in large-scale wind, large-scale solar, large-scale geothermal. If we are going to bring energy prices down over the long term and switch to a clean energy future, we need large-scale investments in these alternatives.
If they're driving up the cost of electricity and gas, though, aren't taxpayers subsidising those industries in a roundabout way? Families are paying for that investment. How do you justify it to them? Why are they paying for it?
David, the important thing, what is the purpose?
Sorry to interrupt. The Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Steve.